Welcome back, everyone, to the LexTalk podcast. We explore English and linguistics, particularly here in Thailand, but also, beyond.
Great to be here.
And we're actually kicking off season 7 today, so exciting stuff. We're diving straight into something really fundamental.
Yeah, something core to language learning.
Exactly. It's not just about the words or the grammar rules, it's about culture.
The hidden layer almost.
That's a good way to put it. So today, our mission, let's say, is to really unpack why cultural understanding is just so essential in English language teaching, ELT.
Right. How does it actually help the learning process? What role does it play in the classroom? We're looking at some materials that really dig into this.
Okay. And maybe just to start, as you're listening, think about your own experience. When you're learning English or maybe using it day to day, how often do you consciously think about the culture embedded in it?
It's easy to just focus on getting the sentence right, isn't it? The mechanics.
Totally. But the sources we're drawing on today, they push us past that right away.
Yeah, they do. We're not just talking about like festivals and food. Though, okay, that's part of it, sure.
But it goes deeper.
Much deeper. For ELT, culture is defined more profoundly. It's about the shared values within a group.
Okay.
The norms, the typical behaviors, how people generally see the world,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe most important for us, the communication styles.
Okay. So it's like the underlying software, the way people operate.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the often invisible framework for interaction, how language gets used.
Gotcha.
And the materials give a really clear example. Politeness,
Oh, that's a big one.
huge. How you show politeness, what counts as polite, it varies massively. Think about English compared to, say, Thai or Japanese.
Very different approaches.
Absolutely. The level of directness people expect or maybe avoid, the use of special forms, honorifics, or how indirect you need to be in certain situations, these aren't just random language choices.
They're cultural signals.
Exactly. Baked right into the language.
So you can know all the vocabulary for apologizing, but if you use the wrong level of directness.
You could miss the mark completely.
Yeah.
And a key insight here from the sources is that ignoring this deep cultural stuff, it's not just a small mistake.
What can happen?
Well, it can lead to pretty big misunderstandings, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also make learners feel disconnected, like the language isn't really theirs.
I see. Alienating, almost.
Yeah. Or, you could even accidentally cause offense without meaning to.
Okay, that makes total sense. Language happens between people, and people have cultures. It seems obvious when you put it like that. So why do we sometimes try to teach language in a vacuum?
Well, that's the core argument in these materials. Language isn't just a neutral code, it's a cultural product.
A product.
Yeah, it developed with culture. They shaped each other over, centuries. You can't really pull them apart.
So trying to master one without the other is flawed.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
Understanding the culture actually deepens your understanding of the language itself.
Yeah.
You start to pick up on the nuances, the connotations.
The stuff between the lines.
Exactly. And it boosts motivation,
Hmm?
too, because the language starts to feel more real, connected to actual people and situations.
Makes sense. It's not just abstract rules anymore.
Right. And ultimately, it improves communication accuracy, not just grammar accuracy, but using the language appropriately, effectively, in different situations.
That's the real goal, isn't it? Actual communication. The sources even mention studies, right? Showing that learners with cultural knowledge feel more confident.
They do. More confident using English in the real world, because they're not just like reciting lines. They feel like they can actually participate in the interaction properly.
Okay. And this doesn't mean we need, separate culture lessons all the time.
Not necessarily. A really practical tip highlighted is weaving it in, introducing small cultural contrasts during your regular lessons.
Okay, how would that work? Give us an example.
Sure, the materials suggest looking at directness in emails.
Oh, okay.
So you're teaching email writing. You could discuss how a typical Western business email might get straight to the point pretty quickly.
Yeah, often quite direct.
Whereas in other cultures, maybe like Thai or Japanese contexts, emails often start with more relationship building,
Yeah.
softening phrases
Right.
before you get to the main request.
Right, warming things up first.
Exactly. Pointing out these differences isn't a detour. It's part of teaching effective communication in English, considering who you're writing to.
That's a really neat way to embed it. You're learning the structure, but also the sort of cultural context around it.
Precisely. Which ties into another powerful point, culture as a motivator.
How does that work?
Well, learners just tend to engage more when the material is culturally rich, right? It's more interesting.
Sure. Stories, different perspectives.
Yeah, think about using authentic stuff. Stories, songs, video clips showing real interactions, discussions about different ways of life. You're not just lecturing about culture. You're using it as the vehicle for the language practice itself.
So the learning process itself becomes more engaging, more captivating.
Totally. Exploring cultural topics, it just sparks curiosity naturally.
Mm.
And it helps learners build empathy, understand different viewpoints, which is pretty important these days.
Definitely.
And here's the bonus. That kind of meaningful engagement, it actually helps you remember the language better. The vocabulary, the grammar points stick because they were part of something interesting.
I can absolutely see that. If you're hooked by a story from another culture, the language used just sinks in more. The sources mention comparing things like birthdays or family roles.
Right. So instead of just a list of family vocabulary, you could explore, well, how is family understood differently? How do rules vary? How are birthdays celebrated differently around the world?
Makes a writing task much richer.
Exactly. A simple assignment about your family or a festival becomes this exploration of social norms, personal experiences,
Yeah.
way more meaningful than just filling in blanks.
Okay. Now, the materials also flag a potential danger zone in ELT. They call it cultural blindness.
Yes, and this is really critical, especially when English is taught outside the traditionally native-speaking countries.
What's the risk?
It's the risk of only focusing on the cultural norms and contexts of, say, the UK or the US.
As if that's the only correct culture for English.
Kind of. And while those contexts are important if they're the only ones presented, it can accidentally ignore or even devalue the student's own local cultures.
Right, and that can make learners feel like English doesn't really belong to them or fit their world.
Precisely. It might feel like English is only useful if you're going to London or New York. It can create this subtle feeling that their own culture isn't, I don't know, compatible with English.
Which could lead to them switching off.
Yeah, disengagement.
Hmm.
Or even rejecting the language because it just feels too foreign in an alienating way.
So what's the alternative? What do the sources suggest?
Embracing the reality of world Englishes. Recognizing that English isn't owned by just a few countries anymore.
It's a global language.
It's a global lingua franca, used by billions across countless cultures, and each culture leaves its mark on how the language is used.
So English adapts to the user wherever they are.
Exactly. So the practical advice is deliberately bring in diverse global contexts. Mix it up.
Like how?
Use examples from Indian English, maybe talk about Nigerian proverbs and how their wisdom translates. Or, importantly, get learners to use English to explain their own local traditions.
Like explaining lei krathong or songkran in English.
Yes, that totally flips the script, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes it empowering. Instead of just consuming imported culture, they use English to share their own.
It validates their background. It shows them English is a flexible tool for their world, for connecting globally. Which brings us to some specific strategies for making this happen in the classroom.
Okay, the practical stuff. How do we actually do this integration effectively?
The main idea, again, is using culture as a tool for language learning, not just a separate topic.
Right. Integrated, not bolted on.
Exactly. The materials suggest a few things. Role plays are great.
Intercultural ones.
Yeah, scenarios where learners have to navigate different cultural communication styles. Maybe meeting someone with different ideas about personal space or directness, like we talked about, makes the practice real.
Good one. What else?
Showing authentic videos, clips of real interactions so learners see and hear language and context, pick up on nonverbal cues.
Things you miss in a textbook.
Definitely. And also having critical discussions.
What does that mean?
Talking about how cultures get represented in textbooks or media, analyzing stereotypes, discussing the cultural values hidden in idioms. It pushes learners to think more deeply.
Yeah, it moves beyond just absorbing facts, makes them more aware.
Right, develops that intercultural competence. And there's a really nice bonus tip, too, about using the student's own backgrounds.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Just recognizing that every student walks in with a ton of cultural knowledge. That's an asset.
So tap into it.
Encourage them. Get them to share songs, idioms, customs from their culture. Use English to compare them, contrast them with English-speaking cultures or others they're learning about.
So the students become the experts sometimes.
Exactly. How empowering is that?
Hmm.
They're not just learning about others, they're using English to articulate their own identity and connect it outwards.
It really sounds like effective culture integration is just good teaching, really.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And the materials do nod towards some of the theories behind this, the academic foundation.
For those curious about the research.
Yeah. Things like high context versus low context cultures. why some cultures rely more on unspoken understanding versus directness.
Okay.
The idea of cultural schemata, the mental frameworks we use, shaped by our culture, that affect how we even process language.
Right, how we filter information.
Politeness theory, people like Brown and Levinson looking linguistically at how we manage social interactions and face, directly relevant to those politeness examples. And broader models, like Byram's Intercultural Communicative Competence, or ICC, that gives a whole framework for what skills learners need: attitudes, knowledge, critical awareness, not just grammar.
So this isn't just a nice to have. There's solid reasoning behind it.
Absolutely. So pulling it all together, the clear message from these sources is culture isn't an optional extra in language learning.
It's fundamental.
Really is the heartbeat behind it. Gives the context, the meaning,
Motivation.
the framework for real communication. Yeah.
So for us, teachers, parents, anyone involved in language learning, our job is to make it real, make it rich.
And make it rooted in the diverse world we actually live in.
Definitely makes you think. So for everyone listening, are you intentionally bringing culture into your English learning or teaching? How do you do it? We'd love to hear your experiences.
Please do share. And don't forget, you can follow Let's Talk on all the usual platforms: our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Just search at LexTalk Podcast.
We hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought on that powerful link between language and culture.
And next time on Lex Talk, we're going even more practical. We'll look at more ready-to-use activities, specific tips for building that cultural awareness in the classroom.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for tuning in today.
Let's talk, let's learn, let's Lex Talk.
And maybe just one final thought to leave you with, building on today's chat. If learning a language gives you a window into another culture, how does looking through that window change how you see your own world when you look back? Something to ponder.